once we reach net zero, right, or get close, we're going to need removals to balance out those residual emissions, right? And there's a lot of burgeoning and growing nascent removal tech out there today. A lot of it is early stage, some of it's sort of mid-stage development. But the only place in many cases where those removal technologies exist today is through the carbon credit market, right? And so we are going to need the VCM for years to come. And it's a really critically important tool for companies in the race to net zero.
Welcome to the Carbonsations podcast, where we speak to some of the leading figures in the emerging carbon industry. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking to Dr. Jennifer Jenkins, Chief Science Officer at Rubicon Carbon, a carbon credit management and investment firm that partners with the world's largest enterprises to help them achieve their sustainability goals. Jennifer, it's a pleasure to meet you, and it's great to have you on the show. Now, if you're familiar with the format, you'll know that we first like to get a better understanding of our guest's background before discussing all things carbon. So if you don't mind, I'd love it if you could share with us how or what you used to do before joining Rubicon, and then how you ended up entering this space.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It's a real pleasure to be here. I really appreciate joining you on the podcast. I've had the pleasure of listening to a bunch of your episodes and really appreciate the work that you're doing to kind of bring the carbon industry to light. My own background is more technical. I guess I started my career in environmental science and ecosystem ecology. So I was trained as an ecosystem ecologist. Did my PhD in sort of carbon and nitrogen cycling and ecosystem modeling. But really the thing that interested me the most always was policy. So, and how can science be used to inform policy and to make to make the world a better place, right? And to improve the environment. So I got my PhD actually last century, right? in the mid 90s, and went into government, in government research in the USDA Forest Service. And then from there moved into academia, and all of that was great. I really enjoyed it, but I felt like the pace of government action and the pace of, academic science was just a little too slow. I was looking for more impact. So I actually earned my MBA sort of in midlife and mid-career, graduated with an MBA in 2016 and immediately pivoted from there into the private sector, where I joined sort of the sustainability, that was right when the sustainability sort of industry, I guess, ESG things were beginning to take off. And so, I have been in private industry ever since and haven't looked back.
Excellent. Thank you. Now, Jennifer, I was wondering if you could also tell us more about the kind of services that Rubicon Carbon provides for its clients.
Yeah, so we're a fairly new firm. We were founded in late 22. We're a carbon credit management investment firm helping the world's largest enterprises to achieve their sustainability goals. We service the entire carbon credit supply chain, really from project development and validation all the way through to implementation, monitoring, sale, and retirement. And our initial product offering is what we're calling the Rubicon Carbon Ton. So the RCT the Rubicon Carbon Ton is a diversified portfolio of carbon credits. And it's intended to reduce risk and increase sort of the options available to ambitious corporate buyers. We believe that in the future, most carbon credits will be purchased through diversified portfolios like our RCTs, right? So that involves a migration from sort of individual project level purchases over to these more sort of diversified portfolios that are really sort of borrowing from the financial services industry. And so our goal with the RCTs is to reduce risk, enable liquidity, really, and this is how you build a market. This is how we're going to scale the voluntary carbon market, and enable it to reach its potential so that it can actually have the kind of impact that we know we need in order to reach net zero as a society. So, a couple things set us apart. We service the entire carbon credit supply chain. as I mentioned before, from project development all the way through to implementation, monitoring, sale, and retirement. And another thing that sets us apart is actually we own the credits that are in our curated portfolios, right? So we're not a traditional broker who might simply facilitate a sale between a buyer and a seller. Actually, each credit in our portfolio sits on our balance sheet. And so that means we really take our due diligence and our scientific, integrity quite seriously, because we actually, we own the risk along with our customers, right, of the projects that are in our portfolio. And the other thing that we did, last year, we pioneered the concept of risk adjustment for carbon credits, which enables added confidence, right? So one of the wraps on especially some of the nature-based projects that are out there is that they're accused of sort of over-crediting due to sort of baseline gamification, if you will. And so what we do is actually look at what we use geospatial techniques to try to understand what we believe is the appropriate number of credits that should have been issued by a particular project. And we compare that with the number of credits that actually were issued. And then if a customer chooses a risk adjustment option, we will over-retire additional credits from a risk adjustment buffer pool that we hold in order to ensure that the credits that our customer gets and eventually retires from that portfolio are as close as we can get to having 1 ton of impact per credit.
Thank you. You mentioned that you also take on part of the risk along with your clients. Could you perhaps dive a bit deeper into that? How exactly does this work?
Yeah, I mean, what I'm saying is that a traditional broker just sort of arranges a sale, right? So a buyer might call up a broker and say, "I'm interested in credits from this project. Can you help me get them?" And then at that point, the broker will go out and they have a network of developers or maybe other brokers that they know and they can sort of purchase those credits from. That broker might never actually hold those credits on their balance sheet, right? And so what they're doing is they're sort of listening to their client, as of course, as they should, and simply arranging the trade. So our analysis is different. We actually own the credits; they sit on our balance sheet, and so we own them until we sell them, and our sort of value and the size of our balance sheet grows and shrinks, right, along with the perceived quality of the projects and credits that are in it. So that's what I mean. And it also, because we own those credits, we can conduct the risk adjustment process, which enables us to, retire with no beneficiary, right, additional credits from the pool of credits that we hold, sort of behind the scenes, so that for example, like let me maybe make it really real. So let's say you as a buyer of let's say you've purchased 100 credits from our nature-based emissions reductions portfolio. So you own 100 RCTs. You can hold those credits for as long as you want, until maturity, and then you may purchase them now if you think the price of credits is going to go up in the future. Maybe it's a good idea to purchase them today. And then, maybe 3 or 4 years down the road, you might say, okay, now I'm ready to retire those credits. We would say, okay, great. Thank you. Here are your 100 certificates from the projects that are in the portfolio at that time. But we believe that there was an over-crediting risk of, let's say, 30% in that portfolio, based on the projects that were in the portfolio at the time you retired. And so what we're going to do behind the scenes is take 30 credits from our risk adjustment buffer pool, and we're going to retire those credits, with no beneficiary behind the scenes, so nobody can use them as an offset. And that way, the credits that you get as a customer with our risk adjusted portfolio are more likely to reflect actually 1 ton of impact per credit. So that's how the risk adjustment process works. And again, that's how, and it works for us because we do hold those credits on our balance sheet.
Excellent. Thank you so much for the detailed response. With that in mind, actually, do you work with third-party carbon insurers?
We certainly know the carbon insurers, and I really appreciated the podcast that you did with Natalia from Kita. we have been looking at the third-party carbon insurance. I think to date, we haven't engaged directly, aside from just having conversations with them. We haven't sort of actually purchased any of their insurance. In a way, it did occur to me that our sort of over-retirement process, in a way, is a form of self-insurance.
Yeah, it is. That's why actually the question popped in my head just now. Excellent. So another thing that I also wanted to ask you about was a term that I came across on your website and it really caught my eye, the VCM 2.0. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'd love to. The carbon market right now is in a transition period. And I would say it's a fairly important transition that's happening. It's sort of, we're moving now in the market from VCM, what I would call 1.0, over to VCM 2.0. And so VCM 2.0 is characterized by increased transparency, this sort of risk adjustment process, the portfolio approach, enhanced methodologies, improved methodologies that are where baselines are more accurate and more reflective of real conditions. And VCM 2.0 is characterized by entities like ICVCM, or the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Market, and VCMI, the Voluntary Carbon Market Integrity Initiative. These are sort of the supply side and the demand side efforts that are underway right now to improve, to sort of set the standard for not only what good looks like on the supply side, but also what an appropriate claim looks like on the demand side. And so those entities are sort of in the middle right now of putting together their standards and defining, how, publishing and writing really the rules for VCM 2.0. And so we're really firmly focused and very interested in moving the market toward that VCM 2.0. I believe it's absolutely indispensable and important for us to if we're going to continue to build trust and credibility and confidence in the voluntary carbon market. We really do need to acknowledge the shortcomings that were part of some of those older legacy VCM 1.0 methodologies, and move to a VCM 2.0 world. And so that's where Rubicon is really focused.
Excellent. Jennifer, thank you so much for sharing all the intricacies of Rubicon's work. But to look at what's happening in the VCM at large, I also wanted to get your take on several very important questions. One of these is, of course, the recent update of the SBTi's net zero standard, which would include clearer guidance on how companies can adjust their Scope 3 emissions with the help of carbon credits. What kind of implications do you believe this will have for the VCM?
Yeah, that's a really important development. Let me just say, and sort of taking a historical view, in October 21, SBTi released its, I think the first iteration of its corporate net zero standard. And along with that release, they also announced an explicit prohibition on the use of offsets for companies trying to reach net zero. And they did that primarily, if I had to guess, because they were concerned about the integrity of some of the legacy methodologies inherent in VCM 1.0. So they were concerned about the quality of those methodologies and the notion that potentially 1 ton was not actually a ton. And so the concern was, if you let companies use offsets, you're actually going to increase emissions, because they're going to sort of continue to emit, and then they're going to purchase offsets that don't actually equal a ton. So on net, you'll have higher emissions than you did before. The problem with that, there's a problem with that logic is, first, VCM 2.0, we're moving toward methodologies that actually will reflect 1 ton of impact per credit. So I think, that's sort of an outdated view, right, based on older methodologies, and it sort of assumes that the methods will never improve. It does, and so So that's the SBTi in October 2021. So fast forward, what happened was a lot of companies would they would sign up to the SBTi standard because it was something investors wanted. I think companies believed that it would, enhance their brand, and sort of in the eyes of stakeholders, it would be a positive. Ultimately, though, I think what it did is it really caused companies to move away from using credits as part of their strategy. Because it really actually gave companies a free pass, right? Because if the SBTi says, all you have to do is set your target, you got to be on track, you got to reach your target in 2030 or 2035, or maybe even 2040 or 2050. And then they say you can't buy offsets. Well, that kind of makes companies like, okay, well, great. I don't have to do anything until my net zero target date. And it sort of gave companies a free pass to just kind of sit back and do nothing. And so they didn't, they really, a lot of companies just really sort of sat back and didn't do much. Fast forward, right, to where we are now in 2024, there was a lot of pushback against SBTi about that, right, from people in the market, from, frankly, from companies who said, the prohibition on offsets is a little too inflexible for a lot of companies, especially companies in hard to abate industries that are finding that many of the decarbonization tools in their toolbox are not fully mature, not fully developed. The cost curve is too high. And so they do need more flexibility than the SBTi approach was offering to them. So SBTi's Board of Trustees, about a little over a month ago, made an announcement that they were planning to revise the corporate net zero standard. And as part of that revision, they intended to allow companies to use offsets to meet some portion of their Scope 3 emissions target. That was a really important statement from the SBTi's Board of Trustees. And predictably, it caused a backlash sort of internally within that organization, where I think the staff that had originally written, the 2021 net zero standard was concerned, right, still concerned about offset quality, concerned about the idea that some companies might be able to, in a way, sort of buy their way out of decarbonization. So let me just sort of stop there and say, and my own view is that SBTi's Board of Trustees is absolutely doing the right thing by allowing the flexibility to allow offsets. And that's for a few reasons. And let me just kind of go into those. Why are offsets such a critical part of the corporate ability to get to net zero? And there are a few reasons for that. One, the market. Well, I guess let me first say the evidence shows that companies that use credits to help with their decarbonization strategy are actually more ambitious than companies that don't. And there are 3 or 4 studies out there that sort of use data to prove that. Okay, so it's simply not true that companies are just buying their way out and not decarbonizing internally. That's just not the way it's working, even though that was the fear. The second thing is, if you're in a hard to abate industry, as I mentioned before, let's like steel or cement or, aviation, right? It's going to be really hard for you and very expensive. And a lot of the internal decarbonization strategies are actually what they call value destroying, right? Because they might cost $300 or $400 or $500 a ton in order to, create the sort of, in order to change processes internally to get to the decarbonization that would be, that you need in that hard to abate industry. So there's a point at which, especially in a voluntary system, right? Let's keep in mind that these companies are doing this voluntarily. There is no, at least today, requirement for them to go ahead and decarbonize. So if it's expensive, they're more likely to not do it. So if we give them a little flexibility such that they can use a credit strategy along with their internal decarbonization, then we'll all be much better off. So why else do we need carbon credits? Another really important reason why it's important for companies to be able to use credits is, 15%, anywhere between 12 and 15% of global emissions today come from land use conversion or land conversion, particularly forest loss in tropical regions. And so we're not going to reach net zero as a society if we continue to lose forest like that. We're simply not going to get there. And the carbon market is a readily available tool that we have today to enable and provide resources to the communities living in those tropical regions such that they might have a better ability to conserve those forest carbon stocks. And so, big NGOs like the Nature Conservancy, the Environmental Defense Fund, Conservation International, these entities have actually all come out in support of the SBTi recent statement in support of using carbon credits to achieve part of Scope 3 targets. And the reason is, for the most part, this is the tool we have today to help protect nature. And we need to protect nature if we're going to, protect the biodiversity on which life depends and also reach net zero as a society. And then the last thing, and I realize I'm going on here, but the last thing is, in order to, once we reach net zero, right, or get close, we're going to need removals to balance out those residual emissions, right? And there's a lot of sort of burgeoning and growing nascent removal tech out there today. A lot of it is early stage, some of it's sort of mid-stage development. But the only place in many cases where those removal technologies exist today is through the carbon credit market, right? And so we are going to need the VCM for years to come. And it's a really critically important tool for companies in the race to net zero.
Do you believe that the VCM has the potential to bring about meaningful change as far as mitigating the climate crisis goes?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need all the tools, right? We need to do everything. In order to achieve net zero and keep global warming at a manageable level, try to be only to 2 degrees Celsius, which we're already almost at, right? Let's keep that in mind. We're going to need all the tools in the toolbox. And the voluntary carbon market is one such tool. It's a way to funnel investment into areas such as the global south, where investment is difficult and costly. It's a way to help companies with the kind of flexibility that they need in order to reach their net zero goals and, consistent with, requirements and mandates that they already have. The atmosphere doesn't care, right? So the internal decarbonization that companies do is actually, from an atmospheric perspective, it's critically important, of course, but it's also each ton is just, it's one less ton that's entering the atmosphere. And so it doesn't, from an atmospheric perspective, it doesn't really matter where that ton comes from, as long as it is a full ton and as long as it is reduced. So yeah, I think the VCM is one of the critically important tools in our toolbox, along with all the other ones, right? The disclosure and transparency and other requirements that, that companies and nations are engaging in today.
What do you think the future of carbon credits looks like? Do you see this space kind of merging with the compliance markets, or do you see both types of markets remaining as separate entities? How do you see the space developing in the years ahead?
Yeah, I mean, I think a compliance market worldwide would be fantastic. I don't see, but, I think that would be the way to really lead to the kind of impact that we know we need. I'm not seeing that, in the very near future, certainly not here in the US. I think so overall, our goal at Rubicon is to create a streamlined approach to investment and purchase for carbon credits so that the whole process is easier, less confusing for the buyer, right? So ultimately, we believe that most credits will be purchased through the kinds of portfolios that Rubicon is offering, and that, we will move away from the sort of current model, which is, companies are purchasing projects individually and doing a lot of their due diligence on individual projects to make sure that each project is, sort of that their headline risk, right, is minimized because they've invested in, the projects that are most consistent with their values and their goals, and have the lowest risk of landing them on the front page. But ultimately, as the initiatives underway, right, from the ICDCM and the VCMI, and we sort of get the rules in place, that headline risk should be minimized. It'll be a more normal thing for companies to do. It'll look more like the financial markets, right? It'll be a real market. It'll be easy to buy and sell, easy to trade, and the overall impact will be quite a bit greater.
Thank you. Jennifer, let's just quickly circle back to Rubicon Carbon for the final question before we wrap up the episode. Can you share with us any of the company's upcoming developments or plans for the future?
Yeah, so we are, as I think I mentioned, we're sort of an end-to-end solutions provider. So we make investments in projects at the early stage that will deliver credits that we can then sort of put into our diversified portfolios or sell on to customers sort of through an offtake process. So I think in the coming weeks, you'll see some announcements from us about projects that we have that we're really excited about, and that we have made investments in, and other partnerships that are sort of on the way. You'll see that, I think, in the next couple of weeks. And then the other thing that we're working on right now is we undertake a really comprehensive and very detailed due diligence process for each one of the projects that we own. And so we're working now on a sort of almost a ratings framework for our projects in our portfolio. And over the course of the summer, maybe late in the summer, we will be releasing sort of what that framework looks like, and it'll be available on our platform for our customers to take a look at and review. And we're really excited about that too, because it sort of lays out the detailed bits about how we evaluate projects and what we've concluded about the sort of risks and rewards of each one.
Brilliant. Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. It was a genuine pleasure to speak to you, and looking forward to all the exciting news ahead.
Yeah, thank you. It was my pleasure.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Carbonsations podcast and would like to hear more conversations like this, please be sure to subscribe. We really appreciate the support.